What if the devastation caused by the wildfires wasn't just nature's wrath? What if it was part of a calculated plan, a scheme for power, control, and unimaginable profit? What Mel Gibson recently revealed about the Los Angeles wildfires on live television might just shatter everything you thought you knew. The camera pans to a sleek, modern television studio. Sitting center stage is Caroline Hart, a seasoned journalist known for her warm smile and calming presence. Her demeanor usually reassures viewers that no matter the topic, everything is under control. But today feels different. Sitting across from her is Mel Gibson. His expression, a fascinating blend of calm resolve and quiet urgency, hints at a story far more explosive than anyone is prepared for. The broadcast hums with a sense of unease, the tension almost tangible even through the screen. Caroline begins, her voice steady but edged with curiosity. "Mel, you've been vocal about the wildfires tearing through Los Angeles. As always, your perspective is unique. What is it about this disaster that you feel people are overlooking?" Mel doesn't answer right away. He lets the silence stretch, deliberate and unnerving. It's a silence that demands attention. Finally, he speaks, his voice low and firm. "Caroline, there's something no one's talking about. Not the media, not the government. No one." The atmosphere shifts. Caroline's professional smile fades ever so slightly, replaced by a furrow of concern. Behind the scenes, producers exchange uneasy glances. This isn't the kind of interview they had prepared for. Leaning forward, Mel clasps his hands together as if bracing himself. "The fires, they're not random, Caroline. There's a pattern, a very specific pattern." Caroline tilts her head, her curiosity deepening. "A pattern? What kind of pattern are we talking about?" Mel's eyes lock onto the camera and his voice takes on an almost chilling clarity. "The areas hit the hardest. They're not just wildfire prone. These places are connected to something darker, something orchestrated. I can't stay silent about it anymore." His words linger in the air, heavy with implication. Caroline, ever the consummate professional, fights to steady her composure. "Are you suggesting these fires are intentional?" Mel holds her gaze, unflinching. "Not intentional in the way people assume, but they're no accidents either." The studio seems to buzz with an unspoken charge. Across the country, viewers grab their phones to record what feels like a groundbreaking revelation. But just as the tension peaks, Mel leans back. His face is unreadable as he delivers a simple, haunting promise. "I'll explain everything, but you're going to want to hear it all." What he reveals next will leave Caroline, and everyone watching, reeling. Caroline, struggling to mask the weight of his words, presses on. "Let's step back for a moment, Mel. You mentioned a pattern, but before we dive deeper, can you share what you've observed with these fires?" Mel exhales, his tone shifting to one of somber reflection. "These fires haven't just destroyed homes, Caroline. Entire neighborhoods, places like Pacific Palisades, Malibu Canyon, Topanga, have been obliterated. The destruction isn't random, and it's not just nature at work. Nature taking its course? Number. This devastation feels calculated, strategic. These are not just any areas. These are high-value zones, home to billion-dollar estates, prime land, and some of the most powerful people in the country. The screen fills with haunting images, scorched hillsides, smoldering ruins, families clutching charred photo albums in disbelief, firefighters drenched in soot, and lost pets wandering amidst the chaos. The scenes are tragically familiar. Mel gestures toward the screen, his expression heavy with conviction, as though willing the audience to see beyond the surface. "These fires," he continues, his voice steady but ominous, "aren't like the ones I remember from years ago. They're faster, hotter, and far more destructive. It's as if they're feeding on something unnatural." Caroline leans forward, her tone sharp, cutting through the weight of his words. "Unnatural? Are you suggesting foul play, Mel?" He nods slowly, deliberately, his gaze narrowing. I've spoken with scientists, firefighters, and locals who've lived in these areas their entire lives. None of them have ever seen fires behave like this. It's as though the conditions are being manipulated, accelerated. The tension in the studio builds as Mel delivers his next revelation. And the areas hit hardest? They're not random. They align with land development projects, resource extraction sites, and, well, agendas. The audience at home watches, riveted. His words echo the suspicions so many have harbored in silence, but never dared to voice. Caroline tilts her head, her carefully composed demeanor cracking just slightly as curiosity takes over. Her blonde hair catches the light as she shifts in her seat. "You're saying," she presses cautiously, "this devastation might not be entirely natural?" "Not might," Mel says flatly, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "There's no way this is all coincidence. And if you follow the money, and you always have to follow the money, you start to see the threads." The tension in the room thickens, and it's as though everyone, from the studio staff to the audience at home, holds their breath. Caroline leans closer, her polished exterior slipping just enough to reveal genuine intrigue. "What threads, Mel? What are you uncovering?" Mel's expression hardens, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet somehow commanding the entire room's attention. It started with a simple observation, one many of us have made. These fires seem to target very specific regions. But then I asked myself, why? Why do certain areas burn while others remain untouched? Why is the destruction so concentrated? He pauses, letting the gravity of his questions sink in. "I started digging," he continues. "I looked into who owns the land, what's planned for it, and, most importantly, who stands to benefit when these areas are cleared. And the answers I found," he shakes his head, the weight of his discoveries evident. "They weren't comforting." Caroline's expression tightens. "What did you find?" Mel exhales, his voice growing firmer as he continues. "The properties destroyed in Malibu, for example, weren't just homes. They were obstacles. Obstacles to high-value developments, energy projects, and even government initiatives. In one case, land tied up for years in environmental protection battles suddenly became wide open for use." Caroline blinks, visibly unsettled. "Why? Because the fire destroyed everything?" "Exactly," Mel says, his voice like a hammer hitting the table. "Every restriction, gone, cleared by the fire. And it doesn't stop there." Mel leans forward, his hands gripping the armrest as he continues. "I found records of fire mitigation funds being misused, developers quietly buying up burned-out lots for pennies on the dollar, and deals that were impossible before the fires." Caroline glances at her notes, her face betraying unease. "Are you suggesting these fires are being used as a tool to bypass environmental laws?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," Mel replies, his words chilling in their clarity. "Before the ashes even cooled, deals were being signed." Mel's words hang heavy in the studio, the weight of them pressing down on the air. "Someone, somewhere," he continues, his voice steady yet biting, "is profiting from this destruction." The room seems to hold its breath as his statement settles over the audience. Even Caroline, seasoned and composed, appears momentarily shaken. She presses forward, though her voice betrays a hint of disbelief. "But Mel, that's a bold claim. Are you saying these fires are intentional?" Mel leans forward, locking eyes with her, his tone cutting through the tension like a blade. "Not in the way people think. No one's out there striking matches. But when you create the conditions for disaster, strip funding from fire prevention programs, deregulate critical industries, turn a blind eye to climate policies, what's the difference? You might as well be lighting the flames yourself." A murmur ripples through the studio crew, faint but impossible to ignore. The tension is palpable, the stakes undeniable. Caroline takes a moment to glance toward the camera, her polished exterior faltering. "This," she begins, her voice quieter now. "This is a lot to process." "It should be," Mel counters, his words sharp and unwavering, "because this isn't just about wildfires. It's about who controls the narrative and who gets away with it." The camera lingers on Caroline as she steadies herself, struggling to maintain her professionalism. "Mel," she says, her tone hushed but urgent, "you're painting a deeply troubling picture, but you're suggesting something bigger than negligence here. Are you saying there's a coordinated effort behind all of this?" Mel's lips press into a thin line, his expression unyielding. Finally, he nods. "I've spent months looking into this, Caroline, following paper trails, speaking to insiders, connecting the dots. These fires aren't just the result of bad policies or oversight. They're the product of deliberate choices made by people in power." The audience at home is glued to their screens, likely wondering the same thing Caroline is. She leans in, her curiosity breaking through her polished exterior. "You're pointing to something systemic," she presses. "Can you give us specifics?" Mel exhales deeply, his voice steady but carrying an edge. "Let me give you one example. There's a massive development project proposed in northern Los Angeles County, a billion-dollar initiative tied to housing and tech industries. For years, the project was stalled by zoning restrictions and environmental protections. Then the fires swept through, clearing thousands of acres. And suddenly, those restrictions were gone, almost overnight." Caroline's lips part in shock, her composure slipping as the implications sink in. "Are you saying these fires are being used to clear the way for development projects?" "Yes," Mel replies without hesitation. "And not just there. The same thing is happening in Ventura County, in parts of Napa Valley. Prime land suddenly opened up for development. And it's not just private companies. Some of these projects are backed by the government." He leans back slightly, his words sinking in like a final blow. "It's a perfect storm of profit, power, and destruction." Caroline, desperate to regain control of the conversation, firms up her voice. "But surely these are coincidences, Mel. Fires happen every year, especially in California. How can you be certain there's intent behind this?" Mel leans closer, his voice unwavering but charged with quiet intensity. "Because of what happens after the fires. Developers are lined up, ready to buy land before the smoke even clears. And the laws meant to protect these areas, they're pushed aside as if they never existed." His gaze pierces the camera as he delivers his final blow. "Someone is profiting from this devastation, Caroline, and they don't want us asking why." The screen briefly cuts to footage of scorched landscapes and smoldering ruins. The imagery underscores Mel's point, leaving viewers with a stark visual of the destruction he's describing. Caroline's voice falters, a crack in her usual composure as she responds. "Mel, this is hard to hear. You're accusing powerful people of exploiting a tragedy." "I'm not accusing anyone," Mel interrupts sharply. "I'm stating facts. And the people watching this, they need to start asking questions too." But just when it seems the revelations can't get any more troubling, Mel's next words push the conversation into outright shock. The interview ends, the broadcast cutting to commercial. But the conversation is far from over. Within hours, clips of Mel's appearance flood social media. Hashtags like #Mel Gibson reveals and #Wildfire truth begin trending across platforms, sparking an avalanche of reactions. Some viewers are quick to dismiss Mel's claims, labeling them as wild conspiracy theories. But others, they start to dig deeper. Satellite images, zoning maps, and obscure articles begin to surface, shared and dissected in long threads on forums and platforms. One user writes, "Look at the land auctions right after the fires. It's all prime real estate, scooped up by the same companies. Coincidence? The public is listening and connecting dots that had previously gone unnoticed. Major news outlets begin picking up the story. Some ridicule it outright, dismissing it as Hollywood paranoia. A late-night host quips, "Mel Gibson thinks he's cracked the case of the century." Next, he'll say the fires were aliens warming up their engines. The audience laughs, but online the discourse is no joke. Fire survivors begin sharing their own stories, their voices raw and emotional. In a viral video, a tearful woman named Teresa speaks directly to the camera. "Our home was one of the first to go. We had just rebuilt after the last fire. And now, just a month later, we're getting offers from developers to sell the land. It feels like they were waiting for this." Her words hit a nerve, resonating with thousands. The backlash grows louder as corporations tied to recent land acquisitions are called out. The turning point comes when a leaked memo from a major real estate firm circulates online. Its contents chill the public to the core. Potential opportunities in post-fire redevelopment zones. The cold calculation of those words ignites widespread outrage. Caroline Hart, the polished blonde host from the interview, finds herself at the center of the storm. In an unplanned follow-up segment, she addresses the overwhelming response. "When Mel Gibson spoke, I didn't expect the reaction we're seeing now. But these questions, they deserve answers. And I hope someone in power is brave enough to give them." Despite the uproar, silence persists from those implicated. Politicians sidestep direct questions. Corporations issue vague statements about supporting wildfire recovery, and major media outlets tread cautiously. But the public refuses to let go. The controversy takes a deeply personal turn as wildfire survivors begin to share even more harrowing accounts. Among them is Daniel Reyes, a retired firefighter who spent decades battling blazes across California. In a heartfelt interview with an independent journalist, he speaks while standing in front of the charred remains of his home in Malibu Canyon. "I've fought fires my whole life," Daniel says, his voice trembling, "but this one..." "It wasn't normal," Daniel continues, his voice quivering as he gazes at the ruins of what was once his home. "Fires don't spread that fast or burn that hot without help. The winds were fierce, sure, but the way it moved, it was like it had a mind of its own. And now, after hearing what Mel said, I can't help but wonder, did someone want this to happen?" Daniel's story strikes a nerve, resonating deeply with audiences. And his is just one of many. In another viral video, Regina, a single mother who lost both her home and her livelihood in the fires, speaks with raw emotion. "They say it's nature," she says, her voice breaking. "But how is it nature when, a week later, I'm getting calls from some company offering to buy my land? Who are these people, and how did they know to contact me so fast?" These stories ignite a fresh wave of anger and sorrow. People begin to connect not just with the mystery surrounding the fires, but also with the very real human cost. Social media becomes a gallery of devastation: charred family heirlooms, burned-out schools, displaced animals wandering through ash-covered streets. Yet, amidst the heartbreak, a new energy begins to take shape, a rallying cry for accountability. Grassroots movements spring up almost overnight. Activists demand investigations into the fires and the policies, or lack thereof, surrounding wildfire prevention. In Sacramento, crowds gather for rallies, their voices echoing through the Capitol. Protesters carry signs that read, "Fire doesn't lie, but greed does. Who profits from the ashes?" The public demands answers, louder and more unified than ever. Caroline Hart returns to the airwaves, her usual poise replaced by a fiery resolve. "It's clear that people are hurting and angry," she says, her voice steady and unwavering. "And they have every right to be. But this is more than just anger. It's an opportunity to change how we view disasters and how we hold those in power accountable for their response, or lack of it." Caroline's words fan the flames of public momentum, but they also attract backlash. Critics dismiss the movement as anti-business hysteria or wild conspiracy theories. Others accuse Mel Gibson of grandstanding, trying to revive his career through sensationalism. Yet, the voices calling for justice refuse to be silenced. Then, just as the tension reaches its breaking point, a shocking development turns the entire conversation on its head. An anonymous whistleblower steps forward, unleashing proof that changes everything. In a video posted on an independent news site, a figure sits in shadow, their voice distorted to mask their identity. Identified only as Alex, they hold up a thick stack of papers. "These," Alex begins, their voice tense, "are internal memos, emails, and project plans. They prove that the company I worked for knew these fires were coming and planned their moves around them." The camera zooms in on a specific email chain. The subject line reads, "Post-fire acquisition strategy." Alex's voice tightens as they point out one particularly chilling line. "When the fires clear the path, we move fast." Timing is everything. The reaction is immediate and explosive. News outlets scramble to verify the documents, and within hours, they are confirmed as authentic. The corporation named in the leak scrambles to control the narrative. In a press conference, a spokesperson issues a carefully crafted statement. "These emails, taken out of context, do not reflect our company's commitment to ethical practices or community rebuilding." But the public isn't buying it. Protests erupt outside the company's headquarters. Furious demonstrators hold up signs demanding resignations and criminal investigations. Who set the stage? "No more excuses. We want justice." The tension is no longer simmering, it's boiling over. And as the movement gains momentum, it becomes clear. This is no longer just about wildfires. It's about power, greed, and the length some will go to protect their profits. The demand for accountability ignites a firestorm of its own. Social media erupts with hashtags like "Shoe Fires for Profit" and "Expose the Greed," spreading the message far and wide. Lawmakers, who had remained silent until now, are forced to take notice. Amid the chaos, Mel Gibson releases a brief but powerful statement. "This was never about me. It's about the truth. And now we have it." Caroline Hart dedicates an entire episode of her show to the whistleblower's evidence, inviting a panel of legal experts, environmental activists, and journalists to analyze the revelations. One guest, a seasoned prosecutor, delivers a sobering assessment. If these documents are accurate, they point to criminal negligence at best and outright corruption at worst. The outrage reaches a fever pitch as more whistleblowers step forward, corroborating Alex's claims. On live television, a former state agency employee shares a harrowing confession. "We were pressured to approve permits for redevelopment in areas we knew were still recovering. We were told it was for the greater good, but it wasn't. It was for profit." As these revelations pour in, the call for justice grows deafening. Federal agencies, once hesitant to intervene, now face immense pressure to act. Investigations are launched into the implicated corporations and officials. Congressional hearings are announced, with CEOs, executives, and lawmakers subpoenaed to testify under oath. The public's demand for accountability transcends political and social divides. People from all walks of life rally behind a simple, unifying message: no one should profit from destruction. Grassroots movements gain momentum, organizing rallies, town halls, and petition drives. Millions of signatures are collected for stronger wildfire prevention policies and stricter corporate regulations. Months later, Mel Gibson reflects on the movement he unintentionally ignited. "I didn't come forward to make waves," he admits in a candid interview. "I did it because people deserve the truth. Because we can't keep letting the same things happen again and again." The impact is undeniable. Several corporations implicated in the scandal face massive fines, public outrage, and shareholder revolts. Key executives step down in disgrace. In Washington, new legislation is introduced, aimed at protecting vulnerable communities from exploitation in the wake of natural disasters. The laws include stricter zoning regulations, mandatory recovery timelines, and enhanced transparency requirements for land acquisitions. Most importantly, the survivors of the wildfires find their voices heard and their pain acknowledged. In a follow-up episode, Caroline Hart closes with a heartfelt message. This story isn't just about wildfires or corporate greed. It's about the power of speaking up, of demanding better from those in power, and of standing together when it matters most. As the credits roll, viewers are left with a call to action. The power to change the world doesn't lie in the hands of the few, it lies in the courage of the many. If this story moved you, share it, talk about it, join the call for accountability. Let's ensure the next disaster isn't met with silence, but with action. The episode ends with a reminder to the audience. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories that matter.